to The Wrap. I'm Jenny Horn here in our Chicago studios. Let's keep the show rolling with what you need to know about today's trading session.
I'm now to Spotlight Oklo. Joining us for Insight, we've got the CFO, Craig BEALMEAR. Craig, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to talk first about this big deal that you all have with the U.S. Air Force. Now, kudos to you all for being selected to power this nuclear reactor in Alaska. Tell us what you're expecting to happen next. What comes next before shovels hit the ground?
Yeah, so Diane, first of all, thank you for the opportunity for Oklo to be on your program. I think we're really pleased with, the contract that we signed to deploy a powerhouse at the Eielson Air Force Base, because I think it demonstrates that we get a lot of attention around our order book as it relates to data center customers, but it demonstrates how the Department of Defense and the U.S. military can be another important customer. And so what we'll now start working with the Air Force on is things like, where the powerhouse itself will go, what a deployment schedule will look like. And one thing that makes this project unique versus a lot of our other projects is we generate heat. Normally we use that heat to make steam, and we use that steam to turn a steam turbine generator and use electricity. But Eielson being in Alaska, it's a cold climate, and so there's a lot of interest not so much in using our powerhouse to generate electricity, but using that heat or that steam for things like de-icing runways and keeping the base warm. So part of what we'll also be working with the Air Force on is kind of the mix of electricity versus heat or steam that we will deploy at that facility.
Craig, your CEO called this Air Force contract a big vote of confidence when it comes to your technology. What does that mean in terms of both the opportunity and the pressure on the company to deliver?
Yeah, well, I think, we try to talk about the fact that we've got a clean, affordable, reliable power offer. And I think having a customer like the U.S. military, I think just demonstrates that there's a lot of appetite for the offer that we've got out there. I was in an investor conference a couple of weeks ago, and I got asked a question about does demand for your product keep you up at night? And just a little bit of background on me. I've spent my entire career in the energy sector, predominantly in oil and gas and in downstream bits of the business, so making and selling gasoline and jet and diesel. And in those businesses, I spent a lot of time worried about the demand and where the demand was coming from. We're blessed that we've got a growing order book, and it almost feels like we have unconstrained demand. And so now, to your point, it's really about how do we start creating the supply to meet that demand. And we're already working on that. We've made an announcement that, like all of our first powerhouse is going to be in Idaho, where the Department of Energy has given us both land and fuel for that facility. And so now we're working on site readiness activities so that we can start deploying assets there. We will be filing our permit for the application for our first permit with the NRC later this year. And we also have a radioisotope business where we're also getting ready for site deployment activities, both for a pilot facility that will be at Idaho, as well as a larger facility further down the road. So, we're really, trying to position ourselves to make sure we're doing the things on the supply side to meet that demand side.
So that is the question, because that's what I figured, because obviously with the growth of AI, there is the demand for what you provide, and especially the transition that the energy sector in general is shifting towards. But in terms of like full-scale delivery, what does that timeline look like, especially when you're looking for your company this path to profitability?
Right. So the path to profitability, on the powerhouse side of our business is we expect, to have that first powerhouse in Idaho up and running at the end of 27, early 28, and we're really ramping activities up there. And what we haven't announced yet, but we're working with a lot of the other customers in our order book around where we'll deploy powerhouses 2, 3, 4, and 5, and we'll want to be working on the deployment of those powerhouses kind of and ramping up those activities at the same time that we're working on our Idaho project. I did also mention our radioisotope business, Atomic Alchemy. They have a plan, or we have a plan with Atomic Alchemy to have a pilot facility to make isotopes, and we'll be looking to have that facility, the pilot facility, up and running this time next year, so it could potentially be producing isotopes and generating revenue as early as this time next year for the isotope business. So, we've got a multitude of paths towards putting revenue on the income statement.